What is up, everybody? Happy to see you guys again. We're doing a little about last night, but for last week version of our video, I'm going to be sharing. I've had a really good week. Shout out to State Kings. A lot of people have made a lot of money, myself included, and we're going to go through just like a really profitable week and talk about some of the winning lineups and sort of the thought process that went into winning some of these large GPPs with limited entries and for the most part. And anyway, I got my man Sheets here with me to sort of talk through it and sort of maybe pick my brain, maybe poke at some holes and some mistakes I made. Yeah, man, happy to have you along and happy to be going through this with you.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I don't know. I might end up being kind of cruel. I don't know, because again, being used to analyzing poker tournaments, what people would do is they send me big hand histories where they ended up winning. And I'm like, well, great that you won, but you played like crap. You know what I mean? They're like, well, that's not what I wanted to hear. I'm like, well, I'm sorry. You know what I mean? So I'd be curious to see, you know, if you won because you just got lucky or it was because of your process. And I'd love to go through this.
All right, let's do it. This is my lineup. So I played in, this is on, let's just see, this the Spectacular Slam on Wednesday, the night before Thanksgiving, which is, we did a show and we always talk about how I always win on those giant, ridiculous slates the night before Thanksgiving. My ROI the night before Thanksgiving is through the roof. I literally don't have bad days. I don't know what's going on with it. Part of it's the giant slates, but I played 10 entries in the Slam, for example, on this one. You know, look, it was a good run. I liked my lineups and my thoughts for FanDuel that day. I played mostly Westbrook. Now, he didn't have a monster game, but it was fine for the situation. We had the Dennis Smith Jr. day, so even though Tyus Jones had a terrible day, he still outdid Dennis Smith Jr. And to be honest, I had some other lineups with Melton in there who had a really nice day. But for the most part, this structure seemed to work out well for me. You know, my boy Zach LaVine is always going to be, I'm going to be a little bit biased. And we talked on this, you know, when we did this slate that day, we didn't have the injury to the information in Miami yet, but we did say that it didn't seem like, I mean, at least I said that I didn't feel like it was much of a stacking day. So you don't see me stacking as much as usual. I played LaVine, who I knew would be low owned and is just always a phenomenal tournament play. You just play him every time. It's pretty simple. He's going to be in about 20% of my lineups just randomly anyway. I wanted to run things back, but I didn't find the real need or way to in any of these spots. I just found a bunch of plays that I really liked. None better than being Jabari Revenge there in Milwaukee. That was the sort of the one that really put me over the top, that no one had played him. He was 1.1% owned. And I had a lot of them that night. With Jabari, you're going to get a lot of volatility. He crushed a lot of our souls last night. But this was a spot where, going back to Milwaukee, I just felt like he would be chucking an extra aggressive, even though they didn't exactly give up on him. But he has something to prove to them. I mean, they drafted him. You know, he was supposed to be his and Giannis in the future, and he didn't end up being part of it. So I sort of felt like it was a good little narrative streak. But also, I liked the matchup. And in a fast-paced matchup, if that game was going to stay close, I wanted to play Jabari. And even if it didn't stay close, I thought he was blowout-proof. So that was sort of my process. And then with the Embiid against Sacramento, I just realized he was going to be the lower owned of the centers, and I wanted to try and get as different as possible. Justice Winslow, I played at 1.2%. He didn't have a monster game his first time back, but I did think there was opportunity for him, and he'd be very low owned. And I played him along with Hero in that up-pace matchup against Houston. So that's sort of my thought.
Bobby, let me interrupt you a sec, because I am taking so many notes. I hope that we don't go on for 3 hours with this one. Okay?
No, we won't.
Because I could go on. So here's my first thing. First of all, do me a favor, scroll up to like the very top of the thing. Okay, so first thing I would notice, right, is you played 8 lineups or whatever that is.
I played 10.
So the thing to remember also is, like, not to tout you, but what a great performance this is. I mean, this is a tournament where you could enter a lot of entries, right? And you see like the guys underneath you, like Cheddar. I mean, these are like top freaking players. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so you're fighting against all these guys. That's the first thing. The second thing I wanted to ask you is, okay, so we're honing in on this lineup. So you entered this one. What did we say? How many times?
I entered it a total of 10.
Okay, so if you can remember, right? So this is the way I think about things. Do you remember like what else you did?
Here's
like
my other lineups. Yeah, I got them right here.
No. Like what else you did on FanDuel that day? You know, in other words, like was this part of like an overall approach to FanDuel where you play something in like a 1600 and this became kind of a derivative of that? Or were these specifically hand built for this tournament? or I'm just curious, like your overall, I mean, where these lineups just kind of came from. Were they scripted? I mean, how do you, I would love to get in your head and like how you actually like develop your portfolio a little bit.
That night I did script on DraftKings. I did not script on FanDuel. And they were deviations off of original lineups. But as I kept going through it, the more I kept liking players. And even my other lineups that night, in the bigger tournaments, I mostly was basically going to try and mix these guys in, but I was mostly looking to run it back a little bit too much, I would say. So I would say this is a lineup where it just sort of, it wasn't left with the pieces. This was a conscious choice. Like the Tyus Jones thing didn't work out, and that's, it's hard to win with that kind of performance on that kind of a slate. But because of the other chalk point guards that didn't go well, because of the other situations, and also, we didn't know if Morant was going to play, so Tyus Jones could have been the steal of the whole thing at the time. Anyway, it just sort of where I was coming from. Oh, it was a different night than I was sort of getting mixed up before. But anyway, I really think it was a derivative of a larger built lineup, but it was in the end what most of my core ended up being. I did have Levine in my highest buy-in lineups that night as well.
Right, but one of my points is that in this day where like so many top players just kind of rely on their crunches and like all this stuff to spew out lineups, like this type of thing was actually like, you knew, like if I asked you like, what these lineups were, you would have known what these are. You know what I mean? Like these were not computer generated lineups. That you actually made kind of you added a little human touch, so to speak, to these. Like specifically, like I don't know how many of your FanDuel lineups you did this, but I mean the first thing I noticed is the Tyus Jones thing, and what's awesome about it is that, like you were getting at, there was speculation as to whether Ja Morant was going to play that night, and he was probably going to play. Okay, like there was a certain percent chance he was going to play, but the point was that if God forbid he didn't play, like Tyus Jones would be just a ridiculous, like, he would have been like, if they released that news before lock, for example, and Ja Morant wouldn't play, like Tyus Jones would be like 50% owned, right? So what you did,
especially before the DeAnthony Melton situation started becoming
right.
split. Yeah.
So the point is, okay, so you took a calculated gamble, and what that made you do in a certain way is make the other, prices of your other players kind of different than the people who are not playing the Tyus Jones price tag, right? So that in and of itself was a nice calculated risk. And even though the risk didn't pan out, meaning that it didn't work out, the news, that by its design actually got you different in other spots of this lineup. And when you're playing against a lot of people, especially you're playing against Cheddar Biscuit, these guys who are just crunching the crap out of like zillions of lineups, any little kind of tiny thing you do that could force you in a direction that is different than most people is I mean, I think that's amazing. And especially when you're hand built. And I think only when you hand build them can you even make that work in a way. You know what I mean? Because you want to make sure that the rest of your lineup gets correlated in the way you want it.
Right, and you can see, like, it's funny because the one, his other, like, you can see the Cheddar Bisc lineups that did finish second and all that. The one thing he did in all of it, he played 100, he played, I think in this tournament he could play 50 or 60, I'm not exactly sure. But he was really high on Westbrook, and I think Westbrook was in all of them also. But I just nailed the forwards. I mean, he had Ish Smith too in this other lineup, and Ish Smith was unowned and put up 40 something at minimum cost. So it's amazing that it held with Tyus Jones there. The Saric play, I was sort of surprised that everybody, and Diallo was good too, but a lot of people went to Kaminsky, and I did too, but until I realized that he was going to be the chalk one, and I was like, wow, Saric at 5K.
Well, I will also tell you this, that related to the Jabari Parker situation, like I can't really read that well. Does that say 11% or 1.1%?
1.1%.
Okay, so for all the talk that people say, like when we sometimes joke, we didn't even joke, we talk about revenge narratives and things like that. My always comment is, you know what, it couldn't hurt one way or the other. I hear all this yapping about, oh, you watch, the ownership is always jacked up because of the revenge narrative. Well, this is like, I mean, again, whether it's true or not, this is the purest one there is, right?
What's so funny about it is people talked on air that day on every show that I listened to about how Jabari Parker, I'm not going to play him at high ownership on this massive slate.
Yeah, but, well, there it is.
There's your high ownership.
1.1%
of them.
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, I mean, the thing that's impressive the most about this, and again, you know, again, I don't know where this kind of derived from, but the fact that you make them, you know, and that's kind of the tough call is like, what do you make all of your lineups hand built, or do you rely on the optimizer to spew them out for you? Or do you do what's probably the best, kind of a combination of the two? You know what I mean? Like have an optimizer crunch your initial builds, and then you give it that eye test. Hopefully you have enough, you know, enough eyes, right?
That's the majority of what I do for when
Yeah.
I play 20 or more entries.
Yeah.
In general, I don't do that with 10 or less entries. They sort of are pretty hand built. Sometimes if I'm playing 10 entries, I'll put all these, I'll put a script in and build 10 out, but I always edit down to my favorite ones for the higher buy-in tournaments. And while this is not a high buy-in tournament at $44, it certainly wouldn't be as low as the low buy-in tournaments, the $5, the $3, whatever.
That's the other thing I was going to ask you, like of the slates that you, of this like entry slate, you know what I mean? Like of all the things you played on FanDuel on this day, was this the low? I mean, I don't want to get too involved in your finances, right? But would you consider this the type of tournament that you would be more aggressive in than the other ones, or more, I don't want to say chalky, but more solid, or just somewhere in the middle? Like how do you regard something like the Slam? Because for me, like when I play the Slam, like it's usually like well, my biggest bind is probably going to be like a kind of a little bit bigger, but a single entry. But as far as my multi-entry one, this is like as high as I'm going to go. Like, so for me, you know, maybe it's not right, but for me, you know, I don't consider this one my off the board type of play. But I was wondering how you regard, or how you regarded, like in this slate, the Slam, as far as like how different and how, you know, how I guess different is the best way I can describe it, but how high variance you would want to be.
I want to be extremely high variance in tournaments with over 5,000 people. This had 8,000 people. And in general, I've done extremely well in these exact mid-range buy-in, like the 55s, instead of on FanDuel specifically, more so than DraftKings. And the only reason I think that is because I'm playing a majority of my action on DraftKings. I'm much more willing in tournaments to not let price, when it doesn't matter, really be a thing. If I think guys have upside. So Levine, you know, and some of these guys, while they were low owned here, like Jabari was still, I think, like 7 or 8% or something, maybe even higher on DraftKings. It wasn't like he was unowned. Joel Embiid on DraftKings was like 20%, but he was like 11-6 versus 92 or something. And I just don't let that stuff bother me really. So when you're talking about guys with the ceiling. So anyway, that's sort of where we're at. Like that, I just thought that was an interesting night. So that sort of got me on a little bit of a hot streak. And we'll talk about some hand built, and you know, we've got a pretty big one coming up at the end of this. That's going to be
well. Before you even go on, like you mentioned the term hot streak, and you know, we talked about this, and I talk about this a lot. You'll have your full math guys out there saying there's no such thing as hot streaks. That you know that every day is different, and you know you can't play higher if you're hot. You can't do whatever you're hot. However, I would like to reiterate that when you do win, and when things go well for you, what it gives you, and this goes back to poker and all of things in life, is it gives you the confidence to make that right play where, you know, if things weren't going well, you might get too chalky, for example, you know, like I talk about in poker, like the people who are winning and just everything's going well, they'll be more inclined to make that high equity bluff, right? That could cost them their whole tournament, knowing that it's the right play, where if someone's deep in makeup or they kick out of their own way and things aren't going well, like, oh, you know what, if I just bluff, they're going to call. What's the hell is the freaking point, you know? So likewise in DFS, like if you see a low-owned guy that is a little off the board and, you know, not exactly the safest play, but you know it's the right play, when you're running well and when you've had good results, you do have that confidence to go like a 30% XYZ player, where if things aren't going well, you're like, you know, I just don't have it in me.
Mm-hmm. No, exactly. I mean, that's exactly right. I also want to point out that it was an interesting night. We had a conversation. Like it was a night where everyone played Westbrook and Harden together on FanDuel because of the way that the builds went, and it just you're going to be giving up some profitability on 14 game slates when you start doing that, and that becomes chalk. Now, like last night, it would have worked in the double overtime, but if you're going to get double overtime, it's probably going to work anyway when you have too high usage, you know, whatever. But it's hard. It's not that it can't work with them even on big slates sometimes, but this wasn't like against Miami. That's not a great matchup even. It just was the way that the builds led people. And I knew that would happen. So I knew I had to play specifically one or the other, but especially decided to go heavy on Westbrook and play a lot of Levine at the shooting guard spot on both sides. And I did well on the other sides, but we're not going to bore you with this. We're showing you big lineups and big or close to big wins.
Well, quite honestly, I mean, if you interviewed Cheddar Bisk, and he would probably say, you know what, I think that the Westbrook Harden thing worked out just fine. It's like he got
It
second.
of course it did. And of
Pretty
course,
good. Second, third, fourth, fifth end, you know what I mean? Like, seemed to work out fine also. But the way these results distribute, you know what I mean? Like 100 compared to 20 is a big deal.
yeah, I still believe that on that slate they left something on the table, and it was partly because everybody paid down at the other power forward spots where I paid up a little bit more, and I paid up at center, which everybody paid down for Biombo. So it was pretty straightforward on that part. And I actually liked, I really liked the slate. We talked about it. Our conversation definitely helped me out. Like, it's always helpful to talk to someone else who knows what they're doing and go through the process. But I'm going to move over just to, I didn't play much on Thanksgiving, but I wanted to show just because we nearly won, not all the money, but we nearly won second to all the money, basically. This is on the Wildcat. We would have won 75,000. I made one borderline mistake. I only played one entry in the Wildcat. I wasn't playing heavy that day. I played pretty straightforward top of the lineup. I told you I was going to do this. I talked about it on other shows I was on, this NBC show, and I said you play one of the Detroit receivers every Thanksgiving day. Another day I've had luck with is in football, but I don't play heavy usually. And I didn't get to this day either, but I played Galladay in this lineup, obviously, in my big lineup. I played Anthony Miller, Chalky, Allen Robinson. I told you I was going to lock in, which I did. He actually had kind of like a great start and sort of slowed down. I was surprised more people didn't play Witten. And then I played the Chalky Bears defense, but the Galladay thing against it still worked out fine. The thing that I did and the Witten thing was the big play. Those were the big difference makers for this tournament. But the John Brown play is it's not haunting me, but it bothers me because I chose John Brown very specifically over Amari Cooper in this spot. He was actually 300 more than Amari. First of all, I thought he'd be significantly less owned. Second of all, I think the corners are much better. The corners are much better in Buffalo than I think they are in Dallas. John Brown has oddly been more consistent, and I thought he'd be significantly less owned. He was slightly less owned, and Amari Cooper put up 6 more fantasy points, which I literally made the exact same pivot in this lineup. Oops. I made the exact same pivot in, let me see real quick. Yeah, this lineup. But this was the big one. This is the one with 1 million people in it. So if I just kept this lineup over there, we win in 75K instead of 10. Still a good lineup, but
okay. So wait. So I have a question. I
made that pivot before the Dallas game, but I didn't make the pivot in the big buy, and I made it in the smaller one because I like John Brown better. Actually, this is not even one.
So I have a question about this. Can you put both those lineups? I guess you can't put them both together.
Yeah, this is together. This put side by side. It's the same exact lineup.
Right.
And right there is for John Brown and Amari Cooper. The only difference.
No, there's another difference. Go back to number 24. The one to 24th.
The 24th is different.
Right. Go to 24th for a second.
It was the better one, but that doesn't matter because that wasn't a 1v1 pivot.
Right, but this is what I was going to ask you.
No, it was a 1v1 pivot. I had it in all three.
No, not exactly. Because
it was a derivative because I played. No, it was because I had 60. Maybe I had 65.
No, wait. Let me talk. The difference is this. This is what I was going to ask you.
Trubisky, yeah.
This lineup has Trubisky paired with the 2 wide receivers, ran back with Galladay. Go back to the one where you did the better one. I mean, the one where you scored more points. Yeah, like this one.
Oh,
so this is what I wanted to ask you about this one. So in this one, you had the Miller, Robinson, Galladay, but you didn't have the quarterback paired with them. You had Prescott paired with Witten, right? And I was just and to me, I was curious. I mean, I guess my first question is how many lineups was this based on? You know what I mean? Like same thing. Like how many lineups?
This is all based on just building one hand built.
This was one hand built. So I was wondering what was going through your head when you decided that, you know what, I'm going to play the 2 wide receivers from Chicago and run it back with Galladay, but I'm not going to use the Trubisky. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use Prescott with Witten. And that's why I think your Brown thing is fine because you're running it back, the Prescott, Witten with Brown, as opposed to if you just went with another Dallas guy, you wouldn't have any run back with Buffalo. So to me, that part, for me, the John Brown part makes just perfect sense. But I just wonder why you went the route of I forgot the prices. But
it was the more logical play. It just cost me. It's a shame because it cost me the extra points that would have gotten me to second place.
if you would you could have played Trubisky in that same.
No, I didn't need Trubisky. I didn't need forget that one. That's the 38th one. Look at the 38th one. This is the one that it was. Act pivot in that line.
Right. So you could have gone.
Would have been in second place for 75,000 with one lineup, which would have been a nice pretty nice reward.
Yeah, but in fairness, I mean, that didn't have any run back, right, from the Buffalo side.
I didn't need to run it back though.
Okay.
I didn't feel that it was desperate that I needed to. I mean,
Okay.
I obviously thought it was the more logical thing because I was using 3 guys from Dallas already. Obviously, one being the quarterback, so you could make that excuse. But like, you know, I thought Buffalo was going to win the game. I didn't think they were going to beat up on them, and Dallas would have to be passing the entire time like they were.
Right.
And I liked playing Dak with less receiving options because I wanted his rushing upside. That was the truth. And what I really did that was good in this lineup is I mostly faded the Atlanta situation. And that ended up being the right thing to do. I played Kamara, but so did everybody, so it wasn't a big deal.
Right. And we were on this, I mean, like right from the beginning when we were talking about the Thanksgiving, you were all over the Bears receivers and the Galladay. And I don't know, did we end up playing? I mean, you must have played Marvin Jones in some places.
Yeah, I played Marvin Jones in my big buy-in. I played one big buy-in on each site. And I played Marvin Jones on the other site with Allen.
Did you do any doubles like with Bears with both wide receivers and also Galladay and Jones?
I just didn't play that much. I mean, I had to drive to my family's place. You know what I mean? I was sick as a dog Wednesday, which by the way I didn't mention on the Wednesday part of that the night before. Had I not been sick and not gone and seen my family, like I had gone and seen my family like I meant to, I ended up postponing it till Thursday morning, which allowed me to win that money because I don't think it's possible I would have won it anyway, but it's unlikely. Anyway, but overall, I with 2 lineup, the other lineup ended up just min cashing on FanDuel, but still it was a really good day overall. Also the 24th and 39th here were, it doesn't sound like much, but you're not talking about a huge margin when you have the final games there. Calvin Ridley catches a touchdown and all of a sudden I jump up there and I win the thing.
Now let me ask you. So when you were thinking about, obviously everybody was thinking that this Atlanta game was going to be, where all the production would come from, whatever it is, and the Chicago game obviously was ending up low owned. So did you again? I ask you this, to try to do you ignore like projections, or do you just say it's close enough that the ownership is going to eclipse it, or are you more of like what? Let's just go with my game script.
Did a show on this slate before we even had projections, and I actually thought the best way to treat it was just try to find somebody low owned. And if I was 100% sure that the Detroit receivers were going to be low owned, that's the only thing I knew. Yep. And I liked him anyway, by the way. And by the way, like not to mention that Galladay and Jones both could have had much bigger days than they did, but that's a whole separate thing. So anyway, it was a good day. Not like the most amazing thing ever, but for only as many lineups. Then I played all these derivatives of that lineup.
Were you tempted to go for Blah, the Detroit quarterback at all, or you didn't feel like it could get you anywhere?
No, I actually wasn't. I just decided I'm not going to just. I wasn't playing enough. You know what I mean? It just wasn't even options. But anyway, so that was Thursday, and then we come back for. I'm gone for the weekend. Didn't even play Saturday at all. Had an okay night on Friday, actually. Had I think a 7th in the Monster. Ended up just barely making a little bit of money. But then we had the big one on Football Sunday, which it was a great day, and it was a day full of what could have been for me. So this starting off, I played one entry, as you see in the Gunslinger. That's a $1,600 buy-in on FanDuel. And I finished second for $50,000. I loved my lineup, especially for this. I mean, this is a 234-person field tournament, so you don't have to get that crazy off the board. I felt really good with being off the board in what I thought were 2 terrific spots. Now, I stand by everything I did on this lineup, so that's all, well and good. To say that Saquon and McCaffrey let us down, they let everyone down pretty much. But
no, I have no problem with your Saquon. I have another issue with this.
Okay, I'm going to wonder what that issue is because I love.
We talked about
it. The tight ends that week were really condensed ownership, and I could have played the guys who I played in about 80% combined of my lineups were what's his name? The Tyler Higbee and the other guy for 30 Jack Doyle. I didn't do that in a lot of my bigger buy-in tournaments because I was going with a lot of chalk-ier things elsewhere. Let's put it that way.
For me, like again, I had to ask you about this. If I were, and again, that's why you're the best, right? If I were playing Carson Wentz, right, and also having Miles Sanders, I would have had Alshon Jeffrey every single freaking time. and figured something else out at tight end. So I'm just curious why you like. What's that?
Yeah, I mean, chalk is part of the reason, and
was it chalky, Jeffrey?
Yeah, he was 27 or 28%.
Oh, okay.
But not only that, not only versus Goddard being completely unknown, by the way,
right.
a spot where Ertz was banged up and could barely move.
Okay.
I like the Ertz play.
Okay.
I also
the Goddard play.
I mean the Goddard play. I also have watched Alshon Jeffrey. He's a guy I play less than most people because I don't think he's physically able to move right, and it's bizarre. So I also thought, here was my real decision though. Do I play Alshon? And I could have taken any of those other tight ends, anyone that I wanted basically. And I was going to play him initially, but I ended up playing Davante Adams, who also had a really nice game.
Sure.
6 for 64 with 2 touchdowns in the snow game, thinking people were going to get off of him. So I thought I was de-chalkifying and at the same time taking the receiver that I believed in more as it being a much, much better player. If this game didn't have the snow all over it, not only would Davante Adams have been 35 or 40% owned.
Oh, for sure.
It would have been like 60 or 70 in a $1,600 buy-in tournament, which is crazy, but he really might have been. So I immediately decided that Davante Adams became the best play on the board, or one of them, because he was still going to have a chance. And I played, you'll see my next lineup coming up with Aaron Rodgers. I still played 15% Aaron Rodgers. I just decided that if there's guys who can do it, it's a guy like that. So we'll get to the mistake also at tight end in my other one. But anyway, still a really good lineup. Felt good about it. Obviously, you don't have to deal with so many multi-entries. There's people who are going to enter. I think you can enter 7 times. I think you're going to get 7 people to do that. I can beat.
But one other question. So when you're building this lineup, right? So was Zach Pascal like the last guy in,
No.
and you just had that amount of money, was it between him and the defense, and you had to make those two work? I mean, where was
Pascal was my automatic play at receiver on FanDuel.
Oh wow! Well, there you go.
Look, it was a position where you have a guy who's going to be unowned, who costs nothing, in a spot where he's already blown up twice this year. And if they fall behind at all, he might see like 15 to 18 targets. So I had a rule on FanDuel where I had Pascal. Look, there may have been 1 or 2 lines where I take something else out, but I had Pascal or Doyle in all of my FanDuel lineups. I had a lot of double tight ends.
Well, that's the answer. I mean, that's what won this for you. You know what I mean? Because that's a pretty big stand, you know. Yeah. And that was great. And now I'm just so with the Steelers, did that just kind of fit? Because I usually don't put a lot of effort into the defense. I just kind of do whatever. So just because there's so much freaking variance, I don't really try to pick it. But did you intentionally have the Steelers, or did that just kind of work?
Second highest owned defense for me on FanDuel that day. Behind there was a really chalky one. I'm trying to remember who it was.
Bengals was no. It was
I had a lot of the Redskins.
Redskins. Browns was popular too.
Oh, I didn't know. I don't remember who it was exactly, but anyway, I actually loved the Steelers defense. I knew that they were going to be somewhat popular because the price was too low over here. 3,700 for the hottest defense in football against a quarterback who throws the most picks of anybody in football. And you have a team that could basically be decimated without their D end. Like, I thought this was a spot you could have had a Steelers trounce. I just didn't like any of their offensive pieces enough. But I thought they might have just beat the hell out of them in this game. Now, they didn't as much as I thought they would, but overall, it was a good defensive performance, obviously, and I'm always going to just play defenses against Baker. Now, I think he can light up people, too, but I'm always going to play defense against Baker and Jameis.
And obviously, you thought that, again, just go through it, is that Christian McCaffrey, forget that he busted, whatever, he was a good play, right?
Yeah.
And you could make him work pretty easily. And, I'm just trying to think, especially it's a hand-built lineup and a really, really big buy-in. I just think it's worth spending a little extra time just on how you construct it. But again, you went a different route than I think a lot of traditional players would go. And going, I would bet you anything that if I don't know that very few people, I bet you in this tournament had Wentz without Alshon. You know what I mean? I bet you that's the case. I bet you find very few. Well, you said Goddard's only 4% owned, so I guess it is. I guess that's right. So that in and of itself made you different. And Wentz, you could have almost played Wentz naked in some variations, right?
I also believe that if I played Alshon, it got me up into a receiver area where I would be upgrading from Pascal, which I didn't want to do.
Okay.
I'd go down again at tight end. I didn't think I needed to go away from Pascal. He was my play.
Okay.
So that was really it's funny because he didn't even put up that big of a FanDuel score. but it was good enough actually for his price. But also, more importantly, it allowed me to do everything else in the lineup that I wanted to do, including going for the two stud running backs who both had their literal like nut low game for how many touches they had and how many spots there were. So, you know, it's just one of those things that, you know, if Barkley puts up 7 more points, it would be nice to win it, but it was still a really nice lineup, nice performance.
And you know what? You had sneaky correlation with Barkley and
correlation
and Adams also.
I do it more than anybody in football, and it's weird, I know, but like just having like the Devontae with the Barkley, and then obviously
back
to the standard with Parker. You want to get correlated if you can. But anyway, so that was a good one. This is the painful part of the day.
You shouldn't be so you shouldn't be so mad about
Hang on. Let me explain why this is painful.
Go ahead.
I had Jimmy Graham, and I went back through it before we did this, and I had Jimmy Graham in 3 lineups. Lineups out of 150, I had almost all of the other guys I mentioned, and they all went off. But I had the room, and yes, it allowed me to do different things. I had 10% Darius Geis. I only played him in the Millionaire Maker in the small buy-in tournaments, $20 and lower, long shots, because I didn't trust in it, but I believe in the talent of him versus everybody on their team. I also wasn't sure if Carolina was on the verge of folding. He didn't get as many touches as I thought, but he certainly made the most of them. And that explosion at no ownership combined with no one playing Aaron Rodgers, people all coming off of this is the odd one where I didn't play Devontae Adams here. I played Jimmy Graham and I played Alshon in this lineup. So it's a little bit funny. I played Jimmy Graham as the pair with Rodgers. Now, I could have just as easily played Devontae with him and won the whole thing at tight end. Or if Jimmy Graham just catches another one of his targets.
I'll ask you, you know, like, listen, you tell me, I'll believe you. Okay. But, you know, if I were, you know, let's just say that I've been doing this for a long time and someone like brought this to me, I would say this is like lineup 143 of a scripted build that if you looked at this on its own, you would have thrown this out in a shot. You would have looked, you could not get me wrong. I'm looking at like, Aaron Rodgers single paired with Jimmy Graham with no Giants running backs, run backs. You know what I mean? So that's fine. You know what I mean? But I definitely think that this is part of why you play these big buy-in, these little buy-in tournaments, and you spread around a little bit, because this lineup, for better or worse, was just not even remotely close to all these people you were competing with. Like, if you go through, like, all these guys in the top 20, right? Every one of them, I think, because I was sweating this, had Higbee, right? Every one of them. So
it's just not correlated with the quarterback matchup. That's fine, though, because I didn't like the Giants all that much anyway, their offense.
No. But what I'm saying, I'm actually praising this is what, and so what happens is because it's weird because you played this lineup, played Graham. I'm just thinking from a just the way portfolios work. Because you played Graham, it forced you in a weird way to pay down for Geis, right? As opposed to like these other guys like Fournette, you know what I mean, who you could have gotten if you ended up playing Higbee in that spot, if you hand built this, you know, whatever it is. So in a way, like the fact that you really wanted Geis, right? If you wanted 10% of Geis, how else are you going to get Geis with what his price was? What was his price, by the way?
I think it was 4.7.
Right. So there were these guys at 5K, right? Like Lindsey, and there were guys that were like, he was 4,500. There were guys like Lindsey at 5K and guys like Sanders at like 5,600 and Drake at 5,600. So the people that played all those guys, their scripts and their builds led them to to totally the same type of prices elsewhere. But just saying that you want 10% of a $4,500 guy, of which there were probably no other $4,500 guys, right, in the whole player pool that were worth playing, I'm just guessing, it leads you to these types of builds where, from a projection perspective, it's probably freaking really close to all these other ones, yet you were the only one to have this. You know what I mean? Just another click one way or the other, and you win this thing by like 10 points.
But you know what's really bizarre is that Jimmy Graham was 200 more than Goddard, and I would have won by 7 points with Goddard.
But I don't think you would even, honestly, you tell me, I don't think
I wouldn't have done it with Goddard. All I would have had to do was switch Adams and Adams and Alshon for Goddard. And
you know what you could have done. Oh, you couldn't have. I was going to say, once you saw guys go off.
But I want to point out, I did make a decision. This lineup was 7th after the first set of games in this tournament. This lineup was 3rd with 0 time left, 1 second left or whatever it was, when however much it was when the block extra point was run back.
Right.
That took me from 3rd, which I was in, to 5th.
Right.
So that is a little bit unfortunate of a 25K depth swing. Nowhere near as unfortunate as it was for Carney, who was in 1st and ended up in 3rd. Cost him $1 million or $960,000. Did cost me as much. But the truth is that you could look back at any point in these games. Robert Woods didn't, plays it all in the 4th quarter. I probably win this tournament. I believe it, and I was the only one with Woods up there. So I had a decision right at the break and at the first thing whether or not I was going to play Robert Woods. There were some other receivers in that price range that I was considering. Sammy Watkins, who was I think 16% owned. I decided not only was Woods the lowest owned, Brandon Cooks was even like a guy I was considering just because.
See, that would have been the tough one because I would have. We went over this when I did the NFL review. That all these Rams guys were looking great, and I guess if you had a choice, you couldn't go to Cup at that point because.
But I decided, and I did play about almost 20% Woods. Okay. I didn't want Cup. I only wanted the secondary Rams receivers. We got to remember the main thing is that if you're going to have Cup was going to have too many too often was going to cross paths with Patrick Peterson for me to want too much of him. Secondary receivers have been destroying Arizona for the longest time. And Robert Woods, the Rams had made a focal point of trying to use him more, including in running him a bunch more plays I cut the week before, just because they haven't been able to get to use him as well as he could be used, basically. So I thought Robert Woods was a really solid play. I love the lineup. Obviously, if you would have told me to start the day, I was going to win 70,000 on the day or whatever I won, I would have been happy. But
let me ask you this. Let me ask you something. So the I want to ask you about the Buccaneers for a second. So what percent, do you allocate to defenses? You know what I mean? Because the only reason I ask you about the Buccaneers is what I'm really starting to think about, I guess I should have thought about this at the beginning. I think I thought about, but not as critically, is when you're weighting your defenses. So like everything, especially in the Millionaire Maker or these big, huge tournaments, is all about leverage, right? I mean, you can get leverage at every position. Obviously, that's great. So, like the Buccaneers, whether you intentionally did it or not, or whatever it is, like there was all kinds of buzz about how this Jacksonville-Tampa game was going to go off, right? That about the pass funnel and all this stuff, and the Tampa game, and that I was wondering how much leverage the Buccaneers would have, or Jacksonville, either one, really, over the field.
It's leverage.
And at 0.8% is like beyond ridiculous.
It's leverage, and it's also a hedge too, because I was into that game on other lineups. So
okay, fair enough.
Both ways. I think I had them programmed in at 10%. They probably spat out around 5%. I definitely left them in everything they were in because I liked the upside of the defense for 2 reasons. One, the season could be nearly over or ending for the Jags. That's the truth. The pass rush for the Bucs is no joke, and you have Foles just coming back from an injury who could have been a little bit shaken up. Everybody was going to play one of Foles, Fournette. Between this game, there was going to be a ton of people on Jacksonville players and Tampa Bay players. No one was going to consider the defense. So it was just a defense that I would have probably wanted 5 to 10%. Probably ended, if you would have asked me that day before, I would have said I want 5 to 10% of it. That's what ended up with it. It ended up obviously making a huge difference in this lineup. So I can't complain too much because I could have just had one of the 10-point lineups and had Goddard in this lineup. So who knows? You know what I mean?
Bobby, let me ask you this. This is, again, we didn't really prepare for this in advance, so you didn't know what I was going to ask you or any of this. So let me ask you a question. So I don't know if you remember your percentages for this tournament, whatever. I actually looked them up on lineup review, like the day after, just to kind of see where you're at. So let's say that, okay, so Carolina was up 14-0 in that game against Washington, right? And, Washington got back in the game and Geis got in there. Let's just say that Carolina scored another touchdown. Geis was out of the game. He ended up scoring.
Oh, I don't think that's how it would have gone.
No. Okay, so let's say Geis broke his leg, okay? And he got 0 fantasy points, and this cashes for 0, right? How would you assess like your process for the rest of your builds relative to, I don't want to say results, but forget this one isolated lineup, right? How do you think the rest of your builds did? I don't want to say even performance-wise, but were you happy with the way the rest of your build went?
I wasn't. I would say that I was happy with the process, that I wasn't happy with the results of some things. I played a lot of the Tampa-Jacksonville game, like I mentioned. I played a lot of the Philly-Miami game, which worked out well. I played a lot, but it's weird because I'm not going to what I'll do halfway through the games is like I'll take Woods out of a ton of other stuff and then leave him in the one that has the best chance and take somebody else. So it's like it's hard because it's not like what I ended up with was of Woods, I would imagine was far less than what I had of him because I was just pivoting off of him because I was leaving him in the one with the best chance. Does that make sense?
You know what I like to do? And you tell me this. The way I kind of sometimes assess my performance, you know, like forget the results for a second. I look and see my lineups and I look and I see if the low-owned guys that I was expecting actually were low-owned. You know what I mean? And I just, like if I see that I had X, like if you looked and you saw Robert Woods at 6% ownership or whatever that is, and he didn't do so well, I would be kind of content with what I did, right? But like where I would consider myself failing is if I went to kind of speculative guys and it turns out they were really, really chalky. You know what I mean? So yeah, I mean, the results, whatever. Football is football, variance is variance. But so you answered the question. You said I was happy with the process. You know, some of the results, whatever. I don't give a crap. You know, we shouldn't about the results when it's determined by so much variance. But you know, again, that's the way I kind of like look at reviews and stuff like that. Is did what show up in your lineups match a process that you could get behind in the future? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So you know, if you went back and looked and as boy, this percent, was this kind of too much? And I sometimes do that when I have my lineups and they start, I sometimes say, damn, I really have too much of such and such, right? Mm-hmm. And if it turns out that he smashed, I have to resist the temptation to think that I'm such a genius. You know what I mean? Because if I had too much of him, you have too much of him. You know what I mean? Regardless of results. You have too little, you have too little of him. So I'm just wondering, you know, if you ever do that kind of critical analysis or whatever, maybe, you know, it's, you know, we should be more results oriented. I don't know. But based on this particular weekend, I mean, would you go back, if you had to do it over again, what would you do differently? Not if you could separate that somehow, not knowing what the results were you happy, I guess, at 106, you know, with what you were putting out there?
Yeah, I felt really good about the slate overall. More of my attention was on the higher buy-in tournaments by then because I had done most of my edits to these other ones, and I want some variance in these lineups. So yep. I actually felt really good about it, and I felt like I gave myself a chance by really focusing on. Look, it's not that I played all the Alshon; it's that I had a program from. I think I left it in where I had one player from Philly on every lineup, and I think I'm not sure if I had one from Miami in every lineup, but I know I had plenty of Devontae Parker when no one played him. Like his ownership was going to be way less.
How did nobody play him?
His price was he was one of the priciest receivers. So
it was funny when I was going through the review, and this was like Wednesday, I guess it was, or third. I forget when it was. I did it, but I'm like, well, I mean, we can't. I was looking at the ownership, and I'm like, Devontae Parker was pretty good, but 22% owned, that seems a little high. You know what I mean? So like you said, you got to stay on top of these things.
Yeah. He was 40% on FanDuel, so it was just an interesting price versus site thing. So of course, you know me, I love to get him where he's a little bit cheaper, but I'm to get him where he's going to be lower owned. I don't care about the price. Yeah. But anyway, yeah, it was a great run. We're going to keep it rolling, man. Thanks for doing this video with me. Any final thoughts before we get out of here?
No, just continue to, continue to learn from the past, or you don't remember the past, you're doomed to repeat it, or some crap. But you know, it is important to go through your stuff from time to time and do reviews, especially even when you do well, to be critical of it. And when you do poorly, you shouldn't just think you did, you know, you were crappy because you did poorly. You got to really take the time to continue to work on your game and try not to be results oriented, as difficult as that is.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, man. Well, thanks so much. I will, we'll talk to you guys shortly. We'll have another video for you soon, I think. I'll talk to you later.
Sounds good.